everyone ready? I'll just put my pen back really quickly. All right, now is everyone ready? All right. Isaiah chapter 6 describes to us an amazing vision that the prophet Isaiah experienced. In his vision, Isaiah is in the throne room of God. There he sees God sitting on his throne with angels called the seraphim standing around him. In the Bible, the seraphim called out to one another, saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is filled with his glory." Isaiah's initial response is one of distress. "Woe is me," he says, "for I am a man of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the Lord of hosts." Isaiah stands in complete fear and awe of God because he recognizes his power. Today, the topic I've chosen is to explain the meaning and significance of the omnipresence of God, omnipotence of God. Now, specifically within the Bible, I'd like to first begin by examining the meaning and significance of the omnipotence of God by first seeing what it actually means, then looking at proof of it throughout the Bible, and finally, what application God's omnipotence has for us, going through the other attributes of God and how they relate to his omnipotence. So let's begin by defining omnipotence. Now, omnipotence, means specifically that God, according to Wayne Grudem's systematic theology, has unlimited and infinite power. God is unlimited and infinite as God. Now, we can see this specifically throughout Scripture in verses and chapters like Psalm 139. In that verse and in that passage, David says, "Where can I flee from your presence, and where can I flee from your spirit?" And specifically, we know from the verses and passages throughout the Bible that God has all power and is all powerful. Now, we also see this in the New Testament besides the Old Testament. We see this specifically in Matthew 19:26. And this verse talks about the power of God, saying, "With man, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible." Now, this is a verse that we as Christians can stand behind and can trust in God through and put our faith in God through. And so I'd like to examine how the verses that show God's omnipotence go on to talk about and link to the other attributes of God we can see as well. Now, besides God's omnipotence, we can also see that he has omniscience and omnipresence. Now, because God is all-powerful, he is also omnipresent, which means he is everywhere. We can see his presence here on earth and throughout because of his omnipresence. Now, we can also see God's power and his strength pouring into his omniscience. Because he is all-powerful and all-present, he is also all-knowing, which is the definition of omniscience. And so all of these things go to show how God is an unlimited and infinite God who has all power and is able and capable of doing anything he pleases. Now, secondly, it's important to note, though, that God acts within his will. So while God does have powerful attributes, he does act within his will as well. And God's will is always for our good. And Jeremiah 29 specifically talks about how God works all things for the good of those who love him, and talks about how he will fulfill the plans he has for his people. Now, God in his sovereign will is not going to do anything that is outside of his perfect character. Because even though he has all these powers, he's not going to use them for evil. He's always going to ensure that his will be fulfilled in ensuring that he will love his children. And so even though God has all these powers and all this and is present everywhere, we can trust in him to ensure that he will be working for our benefit. Now, what's also important to note is how our reaction to this and to our knowledge of his omnipresence and omnipotence and omniscience should be. And that should be one of fear, but also one of love. So let's begin by examining how our view should be that of fear. Now, Isaiah talked about his realization of God's power in the chapter that I brought up in the beginning. And he talked about his reaction, realizing how inadequate and how falling he was compared to the power and holiness of God. And so our reaction should be one to respect and fear God, seeing that we are far from perfect, but that God is all perfect. But finally, we should also have a reaction of love, because we know that God uses his will to work his good for those who love him. And we can see that God will care for us and will ensure the best for his people. And so we shouldn't just be afraid of God. While we should fear him in the sense that we should respect him, we should also have love for God because of all the good things that he has done for us. Ultimately, God's omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence goes to show his infinite and unlimited power, but also calls for reaction from Christians to actually respect, fear, and love God. And so from all these things, we can see and respect and love the power of God. Thank you.